In this video, we're going to be discussing the Maggid of Mezritch, Rabbi Dovber of Mezritch, the successor of the Baal Shem Tov. So let's start off from the beginning. He was born, it is not clear when he was born. As we'll see in a second, he came to the Chassidic movement later in life, so perhaps that's why these details are not so clear. Some people say he was born 1704, some people say 1710, some people say 1700. Some people say he was actually older than the Baal Shem Tov, who was born in 68. So he was definitely around the age of the Baal Shem Tov, perhaps even older. He was born in Volyn in today Ukraine, that area, but then it was Poland. There's a story that when he was a young boy, he came from a prominent family, and there was a fire, and all their possessions burned. And he sees that his mother is crying, and he says, "Mommy, why are you crying? You know, thank God we're okay. Physical possessions, then it's not a big deal. We'll be okay." She says, "I'm not crying about the physical possessions, but what I am crying is that we had in our possession a family tree that traced our lineage back to Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar, one of the rabbis of the Mishnah, and all the way back to King David, and obviously all the way back to Adam. And I'm upset that we lost that." So he said, okay. He was a little young boy. He said, okay, so we'll start a new family tree for me. And sure enough, Rabbi Dovber became this great Chassidic master whose descendants live on till this day. He was extremely poor. He lived, he's described as, there was a story that one of the Baal Shem Tov sent some of his students to spend some time with him, and they see that he's sitting on a block of wood, and he's studying at a rickety table. They didn't have a floor, like they literally just the earth in their little shack that they had, and at night his table became his bed. It was really, really, really real poverty. And they asked him, like, why don't you get some furniture? Get some. And he said, well, you guys are here. Where's your furniture? They said, Rabbi, we're just traveling. We don't take our furniture with us when we're traveling. He said, that's the same thing for me. I am traveling through this world, and therefore I don't have any furniture. So that was kind of the way he lived his life. He was extremely ill as well his entire life. He had his lame in his left leg apparently, and he would go on crutches. His students later described when they would hear the crutches, they would stand up with terror, with that the fact that their Rebbe, the Maggid of Mezritch, was approaching. So that was something that would go with him his whole life. Apparently, this is also the reason why he came to the Baal Shem Tov. He already at that time was an older man, meaning he wasn't young, he wasn't a student anymore, he was a rabbi in his own. And he was ill, and he was a student of the Pnei Yeshua, Rabbi Yaakov Yeshua Folk, a great rabbi in his own right. He was not involved with the Chassidic movement at all, wasn't aware of it apparently. It was a very new movement at that time. And he was told, why don't you go to the Baal Shem Tov? Apparently he has healing powers. Maybe he could help you. And apparently that was the reason he originally came to the Baal Shem Tov, but whatever reason, the healing did not come. There's some stories around that, but we're not going to get into that today. Now, apparently he met the Baal Shem Tov in the year 1753, and he goes to the Baal Shem Tov, and he's expecting some big Torah discussion or something, and the Baal Shem Tov tells him a story. That was it. So he goes a second time to visit the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov tells him another story. Wasn't impressed. Comes a third time, and the Baal Shem Tov says to him, do you know how to learn Torah? Yeah, of course I know how to learn Torah. Are you familiar with Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism? Of course he's familiar with Jewish mysticism. So he said, okay. He opens up an Eitz Chaim, which is the teachings to the Arizal, as we discussed on previous videos, and he says to the Baal Shem, he says to the Maggid of Mezritch, Rabbi Dovber, the Baal Shem Tov says to him, why don't you read this teaching and explain it to me? So he reads it, he explains it, and he said, no, that's not the correct explanation. He says, I'm sorry to tell you, but I read it correctly. I read it correctly. That's the explanation of this part of the Arizal's teachings. And the Baal Shem said, no. He opens the Eitz Chaim, this teaching, the teachings of the Arizal, and he reads the passage again. But this time, when the Baal Shem Tov reads it, the room is filled with light. They could see, they experience all the different Kabbalistic ideas that the Arizal is discussing, and it's a same explanation, same words, but there's a soul, there's light. And the Baal Shem Tov says, yes, you read it correctly, but there was no soul. And that's what I could give you. I could teach you how to bring these ideas into the world and make it real, make it experience them. And with that, he was taken by the Baal Shem Tov and eventually becomes his greatest student. Apparently, he met him only 2 times, each a short period, maybe 6 months. They spent with the Baal Shem Tov. They communicated throughout otherwise, but it seems that this was the main 2 times that he came, and eventually becoming his greatest disciple. After the Baal Shem Tov's passing in 1760, so again, he meets him in 1753, and Baal Shem Tov passes away in 1760, so they only knew each other for approximately 7-8 years. The first yahrzeit of the Baal Shem Tov on Shavuos, Rabbi Tzvi, who was the son of the Baal Shem Tov, he gets up, and he was the leader of the movement. He gets up and he says, the Shekhinah, my father came to me in a dream, and he says the Shekhinah, the divine presence, has moved from Mezritch to Mezritch, and Rabbi Dovber is our new leader. And he takes off in front of everyone. He takes off his special robe and he puts it on Rabbi Dovber, and everybody stands up to listen to Rabbi Dovber teach Torah. And from that, Rabbi Dovber becomes the leader of the Chassidic movement. He was he taught exactly, the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, but he taught them a little bit differently. He taught them now in a more structured way, versus the Baal Shem Tov, very small, little, shorter teachings, very concise, a lot of stories. He had a much more structured way of discussing the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. He also did not travel. Unlike, again, he was physically ill. It probably was very difficult for him to travel, and therefore he didn't travel around. Rather, he set up a network. And this is where Rabbi Dovber of Mezritch, the Maggid of Mezritch, as he was called, as he was employed as the Maggid, the preacher of the town, he set up this network of his students. And the idea was that they would all teach the teachings of Chassidus in their own way, in their own style, in their area of their towns. And like this, all of a sudden you have a real proliferation of the Chassidic teachings, versus until then it was really around the Baal Shem Tov and himself. Now it was also all these students, and the Maggid, unlike the Baal Shem Tov had 60 students, the Maggid had 120 students, and all the great Chassidic masters, all the dynasties, they all trace themselves back mostly to the Maggid of Mezritch, Chabad, all the movements of Poland, Chernobyl, and in Ukraine, all these different movements, they all trace themselves back to the Maggid of Mezritch. And he set up this network, and like this, the Chassidic movement really became stable. He also had opposition in the year 1772, shortly before his passing. He passed away in the end of 1772. The Misnagdim, the opposition to Chassidus, wrote a cherem, an excommunication, on the Chassidic movement, based on some actions that some of his students were teaching Chassidus in different areas that were hostile to the Chassidic teachings, and some of them, a lot of what they had done was self-deprecation. There was a lot of that, where and that some people took it too far, and the Misnagdim, the opposition, they said, "Oh, look, you see, the Chassidic movement is wants to destroy Torah, and etc." Which obviously was still not true, but they were able to kind of find these isolated incidents and base wrap an entire movement around that. It caused the Maggid a lot of pain, and he eventually passes away that year. Again, after that, there is no longer a central Chassidic movement. For about 5 years after his passing, the Alter Rebbe, the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, was supposed to be in charge of the central movement and be kind of the chairman and where they would meet every few years. That only lasted about 5 years, maybe even less, before officially everybody kind of went on their own and did their own thing. So that was that. Before his passing in 1772, on the 19th of Kislev, he moved, at some point he moved to Rovno, and shortly before his passing, he moved to Anapoli, where he is buried. Again, these are all similar areas in all similar areas in that area of Volyn of Ukraine. Apparently, they're not so far from each other, these towns. So his teachings, he, again, similar to the Baal Shem Tov, he never wrote his own teachings down, but his teachings were collected in the books Maggid of Yaakov or Torah and others, and many of Chassidic works through all the generations quote his teachings extensively. Many of the Chassidic teachings are based on his teachings or repetition of his teachings. So his name and his teachings are littered throughout the teachings of Chassidus, of Chassidism throughout the generations. And again, he was the primary person who taught the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. So it makes sense that his name would be quoted a lot. As far as his legacy, obviously he has this legacy of the Chassidic teachings and stabilizing the Chassidic movement by creating a network. It wasn't no longer a movement of one, but a movement of many, and surrounding the teachings of the Chassidic movement. Also, his children themselves became Chassidic masters. He had a son who was Rabbi Avram HaMalach. He was called the Malach, which means the angel. He was almost inhuman, as far as he was totally beyond this world. He was not a worldly person, I guess the best way to say it. He was, so they called him the Malach. The story goes that the Alt Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, when he came to the Maggid to study Chassidus, he was given he was made the study partner of Rabbi Avraham, and the idea was that the Alter Rebbe would teach him the revealed teachings of the Torah, as he at that time was not yet a Chassid, and he excelled in those. And Rabbi Avraham would teach him the Chassidic teachings, and the Alter Rebbe would steal time, which means he would turn the clock back when he wasn't looking. And Rabbi Avraham Malach was so not in this world, he didn't even notice that how much time had gone by. And there's many stories around that. And after the passing of the Maggid, he did take over as a Chassidic master for some time, and eventually his grandson, Rabbi Avraham Malach's grandson, his name was Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzin. He was a Chassidic master in Tsarist Russia, and eventually he was persecuted by the Tsarist government, and he fled to Romania or Hungary, that area, a place called Sadiger, and he till today the Sadiger dynasty, and many others which are based on the Ruziner dynasties, including the Vishnitz and others, all base themselves on the Ruziner dynasties, essentially. And it's some of the biggest Hasidic dynasties in Israel are all descendants or disciples of the Ruziner. So the Maggid's progeny continue to teach Chassidus and teach the Chassidic teachings throughout the world. So thank you very much for joining. If I made a mistake, or if there's something you think I should have said, could have said, please let us know in the comments. We love to hear feedback. Like, subscribe, so you could get the next videos, and we will see you the next time.